Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and welcome to the Keiser Report. At this hour, the financial terrorists at Goldman Sachs are roaming free. Hey, let's take a look at that in-trade contract. There's a 30% probability that Lloyd Blankfein steps down as CEO of Goldman Sachs. That's down from 50% as the progress of the law gets all muddied by special interests, although there is now a rumor of a criminal indictment coming. And here's the interesting thing. Here's Bill Clinton kind of weighing in and saying that Goldman Sachs, he's not sure if what they did was wrong.
These Goldman guys are mad because they think they were targeted at this time, and they think they didn't violate the law. I'm not at all sure they violated the law, but I do believe that there was no underlying merit to the transaction.
Right. Thanks, Bill. Here's a guy who doesn't even know what the definition of is. You know, let's flash back to 1978 for a second. Talk about Bill and Hillary Clinton when they were still in Arkansas. And, of course, Hillary famously made $1,000 turn into $100,000 in the cattle futures market. Put some of those headlines up on the screen, New York Times, Wikipedia. They were using what's called a look-back trade. In other words, corrupt brokers, at the end of the day, when they have a winning or losing trade, they then assign the account number depending on whether they're trying to give a corporation a tax loss or whether they're trying to curry political favor with somebody like Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. How do I know this? I used to do it myself when I was working on Wall Street. It's a standard operating procedure. It's called look-back trade. It's just another one of the myriad ways fraud is perpetrated on Wall Street. Clearly, Hillary was involved in fraudulent trading in the cattle futures market in 1978 to set up their political career in Arkansas. Now Bill Clinton's not sure if Goldman Sachs doing bad. Shame on you, Bill Clinton. You make me embarrassed to be an American. You, sir, are aiding and abetting financial terrorist Goldman Sachs. Let's bring in Stacy Herbert. Hello, Stacy Herbert.
Hi, Max. Actually, in that clip, previously in the clip, Bill Clinton had said that there were some legitimate uses for derivatives, and those should be allowed. And I'm assuming he means the derivatives that he used in order to profit from the cattle futures. But he says that many derivatives, however, have no economic purpose. But that brings me to another video clip, and this is Timothy Geithner, interviewed by George Stephanopoulos.
But even as Washington limits these risky investments, Wall Street is trying to create new ones. The latest, letting people bet on box office results, a futures market in movies. Do you think that's a good idea?
You know, here's what I think about this, George. The financial sector will be creative and will innovate. It will come up with products that meet some real need people have, and to also come up with products which are designed to help people bet on some basic outcome. That's going to happen. It's a necessary part of running a good financial system, but those things come with risks.
Well, Geithner is completely wrong. The foundation upon which these contracts are built is corrupt, as we've been talking about on this show, and as I've enumerated on this show. The basic core foundation of market and price discovery mechanism is corrupted. And there's no place to add yet another market like box office futures contracts from Cantor Fitzgerald, which are going to be incredibly easy to manipulate and will be an insider trader's paradise.
Well, Geithner remains in the headlines. Whoa. TARP watchdog says criminal charges may be on the table for New York Fed over AIG cover-up. This is Neil Borofsky, the special Inspector General for TARP Oversight, better known as SIG-TARP. He says that criminal or civil charges are still on the table in the AIG cover-up.
Well, yeah, Geithner was at the New York Fed working hand in glove with the terrorists on Wall Street, and now he's Treasury Secretary. And yeah, of course, he and Bernanke and Lloyd Blankfein and Jamie Dimon, they're part of the conspiracy that is driving America's economy into the ditch.
Well, he's probably going to be the Libby Scooter of this administration. No doubt he'll have a presidential pardon before the charges are even filed. Neil Borofsky also says that he's looking into possible insider trading connected to TARP. So he says that his agency wants to know if bankers bought stock in their companies before it was made public that their institutions would get TARP money.
Cut right there. I said on this show. Of course there's insider trading in the banking stocks. Of course there's insider trading in the banking stocks before, during, and after TARP. It's an insider trader's paradise. It's a market manipulating casino gulag. Oh, my God.
Geithner, in this previous clip, he has just said, you know, that bankers are innovative and creative, but there are some risks involved. Here's a headline that goes with this risk. Holy cow, the Treasury is taking online donations to pay down the debt. Now, every year, Americans are allowed to contribute to to paying down the debt via their income tax return. But now the Treasury has actually set up a website for you to donate money if you wish to help pay down the debt in order to continue being able to bail out too big to fail banks.
Yeah, I saw that website. They're begging people to help them pay down the debt that is being engineered by guys like Tim Geithner. Why don't they just go to Tim Geithner and get him to help pay down the debt that he himself is creating, or Blankfein or Jamie Dimon? Why do they keep abusing the American people? Why? Why? Why do the American people getting shafted like this every day?
Well, from holy cow, I move on to Buddha. This is Oliver Buddha, the former Associate General Counsel at Lehman Brothers. Fold understated pay more than $200 million, Lehman's Buddha says.
Is this Dick Fold again?
Dick Fold. In testimony before Congress under oath, he argued with Henry Waxman, and he insisted that he only had made $300 million between 2000 and 2007, when now this former Associate General Counsel is saying, no, he definitely made $500 million.
Right. More accounting fraud.
Well, and also, there will be no, it's just a show trial, it's a show headline. In fact, he'll say it's too complex. I got paid in so many ways. It was too complex for me to understand.
That's right. That's how you avoid being hit up for fraud these days in America. You just make the crime so complicated that there's no way a jury could possibly understand them. Therefore, you are innocent.
Moving on to some more bankers. Goldman emerges from Senate showdown ahead, $549 million. So the show trials earlier in the past week, many people think, they were being grilled. One of the headlines was Goldman grilled. So everybody was thinking, it's like there's really going to be some justice here. But of course, the market was telling you what the truth was.
The only market that's telling you what the truth is the gold bullion market, which is making screaming new highs in many currencies around the world. As these idiots on Wall Street continue to screw up the American economy, gold will continue to go higher, my friend.
Well, shortly after the hearings in front of Congress, Goldman reportedly considering settlement with SEC. But another headline reads, federal prosecutors conducting criminal probe of Goldman Sachs. Now, according to this article, in order to proceed criminally in a case, you need to have very clear evidence of lying, cheating, and stealing, says a former deputy chief of the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York.
Well, if they take the dictionary private through a leveraged buyout, they can change the definitions of those words and then refloat those words on some kind of lexiconic exchange and be innocent by virtue of institutionalized solipsism.
Okay, and then I have this headline, warning for Britain as financial chaos spreads to Spain. David Cameron suggested that Britain could follow Greece into the crisis. He says Greece stands as a warning to what happens if you don't pay back your debt. Now, an economist from VTB Bank, Neil McKinnon, says that it was a mystery that Britain had not yet been downgraded. For me, it was the rating agencies are the people who downgrade you. And the rating agencies were integral to all the previous stories we've just been talking about, because all of those derivatives need a rating in order to be sold to widows and orphans around the world. And those rating agencies and all of these CDOs had safe haven in London.
Right.
So, of course, they're not going to downgrade.
And they have another story there about the fees, right? The fees attached to the rating agency.
This is my next headline.
Explain to the people. Tell the people about this. This is shocking.
CDO fees flow to rating agencies. So credit rating agencies, according to the article, are still being paid millions of dollars a year to report on the performance of collateralized debt obligations that have lost most of their value despite having been issued in many cases with a AAA stamp of approval. The fees are known as rating surveillance payments, and they're paid to the agencies to continue overlooking the CDOs. But because the CDOs are so complicated, they're impossible to unwind. But the rating agencies are still collecting their fees because they're unable to unwind them.
That's a great business. Right, so the rating agencies are remarkable in that they are clearly conflicted. They're clearly taking what amounts to graft and bribe money. And I think Moody's is publicly traded. It's owned by Warren Buffett to some degree. And it's part of the whole integration of fraud in America. Remember, if you take fraud out of the American economy, there's nothing left but guns and donuts.
And I have a final quote here from this article. It pertains to this notion of these show trials that are often just show headlines. a congressional investigation found last week that Moody's Investors Service and Standard & Poor's, the biggest rating agencies, were unduly influenced in assigning ratings on CDOs by the banks that paid these fees.
I think that's called payola. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. When we come back, Peter Schiff.
Every month we give you the future. We help you understand how we'll get there and what tomorrow will bring. The best in science and technology from across Russia and around the world. Join us for Technology Update on RT.
Hungry for the full story? We've got it firsthand. The biggest issues get a human voice, face to face with the newsmakers on RT.
Millions died here. And millions looked forward to be helped and saved. The pain and sufferings will never be forgotten, as well as the joy of liberation. Europe, spring of 1945, on RT.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Let's go to Peter Schiff, author and investment advisor. He's the president of Euro-Pacific Capital. Peter is running for the Republican nomination in Connecticut for a seat in the U.S. Senate. I'm holding up a copy of Peter's book, Crash Proof. This is my own personal copy that I've read through several times. It's a classic of the genre. Anyone who wants to know what happened, read this book, Crash Proof. Peter, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Are you holding up, do you have 2.0 or the original?
I've got the original. I've cherished this original copy with my original notes in it.
Yeah, but if you're buying it brand new for today, you can get the revised version, which has got the first version in its entirety, but we added about 80 pages of supplemental information to bring you up to date on where we are now, although obviously a little bit of time has gone by now since even that was revised.
Right. Well, fortunately, you do your vlog several times a week on YouTube, and you've really pioneered the vlogging space to go along with a lot of the things you've been saying in the financial space. Now, let's talk about your latest blog about China. You say that by China revaluing the RMB higher, the very thing that the U.S. wants, China gets huge gains, and America would be the big loser. And you suggest that maybe it's reverse psychology on the part of Geithner, that they're trying to...
I don't think we really want that. I mean, certainly if we do, we need to be careful what we wish for, because we have to understand, and I'm sure people in Washington do understand, that China is loaning us all this money and supplying us with all this inexpensive consumer merchandise. Obviously, in the short run, and this is the short run only, we benefit from that because Americans can buy things that they might otherwise not be able to afford. The politicians can pass bailouts and stimuluses that they otherwise couldn't fund. So the government can keep growing, consumers can keep spending, all because of China, and not just China, but other governments around the world that are doing the same thing. Now, of course, none of this is good for America in the long run. All of this, more government and more consumption, is the last thing we need. We're digging ourselves into a deeper hole. But remember, American politicians don't care about the long-term damage they do to our economy. All they care about is keeping the music going long enough to get reelected.
Now, let's just move on for a second to Alan Greenspan, who is by many considered to be the arch villain of the catastrophe that is the global markets. Disregarding the last 6 months rally, which has been on very, very light volume. Tell us about your bet with Alan Greenspan. What's going on there?
Well, it's not a bet. I saw Alan Greenspan interviewed on ABC, and he was basically saying that the financial crisis was the result of a failure of capitalism, that we needed more regulation. But he still tried to defend capitalism as being the best system out there, but that every once in a while, just for no apparent reason, things like this happen. And of course, it wasn't for no apparent reason. I wrote in my book, Alan Greenspan called it a 100-year flood. And my point was, well, it was a flood because Greenspan himself blew up the dam, and that's why there was a flood. I issued a challenge to pay Alan Greenspan his customary honorarium for the privilege of debating him on his role and the Fed's role in creating the financial crisis and inflating the real estate bubble. In fact, Alan Greenspan has often said that it wasn't the low interest rates that were responsible for the housing bubble. It was the fact that so many people were using adjustable rate mortgages and interest-only mortgages. And my point is, well, why does he think they were using those products? They were using them because he made them so inexpensive. The reason that you had a teaser rate was because Alan Greenspan had interest rates at 1%. That was the difference. If short-term interest rates were not so low, the subprime market never would have gotten going. I mean, he provided it with all the fuel that it needed. To come now back and say now that the Fed wasn't involved, and especially when Alan Greenspan, in front of a testimony, direct testimony in front of the Senate and House, he actually encouraged and praised the use of adjustable rate mortgages that he now says were problematic. And at the time he was doing that, I was writing op-eds, I was writing articles on the internet, warning about the housing bubble, that Greenspan was inflating, warning that he was keeping rates too low, that too many people were being suckered into adjustable rate mortgages because of the Fed's low interest rates, and that ultimately when interest rates went up and these mortgages reset, it was going to be an explosion in the housing market, and that the lenders and Fannie and Freddie would go bankrupt. And if it was obvious to me, without the benefit of any government accountants or any of these reports that the Fed had, if I could see it from miles away, obviously it should have been apparent to Alan Greenspan down there at ground zero.
Right. So in the book Crash Proof, it actually goes into chapter and verse and details the whole Fannie and Freddie fandango. It explains exactly what will happen, what did happen. So, Peter Schiff, you're a candidate for Senate now. How many times have you been invited to testify before Congress to tell them exactly what happened?
Not once. And, of course, the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee and the architect of this new financial regulation is Chris Dodd. He's from Connecticut. I live in Connecticut. I'm running for his Senate seat. You would think that he would invite me, one of his own constituents, to Washington, given that I was one of the few people who accurately forecast this crisis. And, if you really want to see a good presentation I did on the internet, type in Peter Schiff Mortgage Bankers and watch that hour presentation I gave in 2006 in front of the Western Regional Mortgage Bankers Association. There were 3,000 lenders there, mortgage lenders, subprime lenders. And I also addressed that convention in 2005, telling them the same thing, and they referenced that at the beginning of it.
Sure. Now, the honorarium that typically Greenspan would get, you're saying you'd pay it and to debate him on these points. What would typically be his honorarium, you think?
I think he might get $100,000 for a speech. I mean, maybe he gets more. I mean, maybe he gets, 150 or 200.
I tell you what, Peter, I'll match it. I'll match it. You put up whatever his honorarium is, I'll match it. If you do the debate on my show, I'll match it. I'm a wealthy man because you got me into gold, 8 years ago, and I've got money to burn, and I'm going to match your honorarium bet to Alan Greenspan. We're going to have him right on our show, and we're going to get to the bottom of this.
Remember, though, I was thinking maybe I'd be able to have it live, sell tickets, and maybe sell the TV rights. Maybe you can get the internet rights. But I was thinking of maybe I could even turn it into a Frost-Nixon kind of thing, because I think a lot of people would like to see me take them down.
Well, okay, let's move on to some of these issues of today now. William K. Black, we all remember from the S&L crisis, he put a lot of bankers in jail. In his testimony on the Lehman collapse, he said that he was able to shut down hundreds of savings and loans and put thousands of executives in jail with no new regulation. By insisting that the crimes committed by bankers are not covered by existing regulation, isn't Obama giving a get-out-of-jail card to those who have committed fraud?
Yeah, fraud is already illegal. I mean, we don't need new rules and new regulations to do that. Obviously, you can look at the Goldman Sachs charges, whether they're right or wrong. What they're being accused of doing is illegal already, right? So having these extra rules and regulations in place wouldn't have done anything. The worst part about this is when Congress passes a law, what happens is then the regulators come in and enact regulations pursuant to that law, and that is the real damage. And, Barack Obama said that, well, no brokerage firms, nobody has to fear anything if they're doing everything right. That's not true, because what happens is the government asks you to prove that you're doing everything right. And the way they ask you to prove it and the things that they ask you to do, the hoops they ask you to jump through, the hurdles they ask you to clear, it's very expensive. It's very time consuming. I am already struggling as a small brokerage firm to comply with all the new rules and regulations that were implemented following the dot-com crisis, following September 11th, and the implementation of the Anti-Money Laundering Act and the Patriot Act.
Sarbanes-Oxley?
Yes, Sarbanes-Oxley. There's all kinds of stuff. The devil is always in the details. And, you know, the big firms, every time there's new regulation on Wall Street, it's always because one of these big firms did something wrong. And then, you know, what happens is all the regulation disproportionately hits the smaller firms because they don't have the economies of scale to absorb the higher compliance costs. And it ends up leading to more small firms going out of business, selling out to the big firms. It creates a bigger barrier of entry for the bigger firms. And the result is that these big firms that they say are too big to fail actually get bigger and bigger as a result of the anti-competitive nature of this regulation.
Don't the people in Connecticut, don't they want to be relieved of the burden of having all of this horrendous financial chicanery going on in their own backyard?
Well, hopefully that's part of my point when I'm running for Senate in Connecticut. But, you know, the worst part about all this financial regulation is that none of it addresses the underlying root cause of the problem. You have to understand that even if this entire bill existed 4 or 5 years ago, it wouldn't have stopped the housing bubble. The problem was that the Fed kept interest rates too low, that Fannie and Freddie were subsidizing mortgages and guaranteeing mortgages that created a moral hazard, and the government was insuring bank deposits that created a moral hazard. All of that stuff is untouched. The Federal Reserve is actually given more power to do more damage under this bill. In fact, they have interest rates even lower now than they were when they inflated the housing bubble. Freddie and Fannie have gotten bigger. The guarantees are now explicit, not implicit. And Fannie and Freddie are guaranteeing more mortgages now than ever before. And, of course, the Fed has upped their the FDIC has upped what it guarantees and as far as bank deposits. So we have more moral hazards. We have more subsidies. We're having the government doing even more damage. We haven't done anything to address the root cause of this crisis. All we've done is window dressing. We've got more worthless rules and regulations that are not going to stop the next financial crisis. If anything, they're probably going to make it worse.
Well, all these problems are all part and parcel of a system that is called itself free market capitalism. It rests on the bedrock of interest rate price discovery, which is not free market capitalism. It's set by Politburo, price riggers in Washington. So how do you reconcile those two things? It doesn't make any sense.
I know, and the problem is I hear interviews and I see reporters, and whenever anybody brings up the free market, they're like, well, why should we trust a free market? Look at the mess that we got. Look at the financial catastrophe that was brought on by the free market. It was not brought on by the free market. That's my point. It was brought on by government intrusion into the free market. It was central banking and central government planning and government subsidies and government regulation and all the things that government did to interfere with the free market and distort the free market. That's why we had a crisis. And instead of understanding that and trying to untangle the government from the market, looking at the rules and regulations and subsidies that led to the malinvestments, that led to the excess speculation, and removing those, all we want to do is layer the economy with more regulations that are going to make it less efficient and lead to even bigger misallocations and bigger problems in the future.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Peter Schiff, thanks again for being on the Keiser Report.
Sure, thanks. I got a brand new book out, too. Look for it, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. It's a cartoon book on economics, and I think it's going to do a lot to shed a lot of light on this problem, and a lot of people will be able to understand the mess because it's a very easy-to-understand book. It's so simple, maybe even our congressman will be able to understand it.
Well, you should come out with a film version, but I think you should take the approach of making it like a horror film. The kids love horror films. Peter Schiff stars in The Debt That Killed America. He'd be a huge hit.
It's supposed to be a comedy, though.
It'd be like Abbott and Costello when they meet Godzilla or something. All right, anyway, we got to go. Thanks again for being on the Keiser Report. I want to thank my guests, Stacy Herbert and Peter Schiff. If you want to send me an email, please do so at
SchiffForSenate.com if anyone wants to help out. with the fundraising.
Yeah, I'm gonna and we're gonna debate Alan Greenspan on my show. We're gonna match it. I'm gonna put up 100,000, 200,000. Cost is no object to get him in front of the camera and to get to the bottom of this nightmare that he's perpetrated on the American people. And that's gonna do it for this week. If you want to send me an email, please do so at Keiser Report at rttv.ru. Until next week, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.